January 1st, 1959, Havana, Cuba. Santo Trafficante Jr. stood in a Sanssouci cabaret, his flagship casino, watching chaos unfold outside. Revolutionaries poured into the streets, celebrating, chanting, smashing swap machines, throwing gambling equipment into the gutter. Fulgencio Batista had fled hours earlier. Fidel Castro was marching toward Havana from the mountains, and Castro had promised to close the casinos. Trafficante thought Castro was bluffing. The casinos generated millions in revenue. They employed thousands of Cubans. The government needed that money. He was wrong. 6 months later, Castro imprisoned Trafficante in the Tresconia detention facility, then deported him back to the United States. This is the story of Santo Trafficante Jr., the Tampa mob boss who appeared to be a legitimate cigar factory owner. How his father built connections to Cuba starting in the 1940s. How Santo Jr. became one of the most powerful casino operators in Havana under Batista's corrupt regime. And how the FBI finally realized the quiet Tampa businessman wasn't just selling cigars. He controlled Cuba's entire gambling empire and ran drug trafficking networks from South America through Havana to the United States, until Castro destroyed it all in a single night. The Cigar City Boss. 1886, Sicily. Santo Trafficante Sr. was born in Chanchana, near Palermo. At age 18, he emigrated to America, landing in Tampa, Florida, just after the turn of the century. Tampa was Cigar City, the center of America's hand-rolled cigar industry. Ybor City, Tampa's Cuban-Italian immigrant neighborhood, housed hundreds of small cigar factories. Workers rolled tobacco leaves by hand, while a lector read newspapers and novels aloud to pass the time. Trafficante Sr. married and started a family. 4 sons: Frank, Santo Jr., Sam, and Henry. He became a naturalized citizen. He joined civic organizations, the Elks Lodge, the Robin Hood Social Club, the Italian Club, and he started working in organized crime. During Prohibition, Tampa became a smuggling hub. Rum from Cuba, whiskey from the Caribbean, all flowing through Port Tampa Bay into speakeasies across Florida. Trafficante Sr. became heavily involved in bootlegging. He also ran bolita games, a popular illegal lottery among Tampa's immigrant communities. Players bet on numbers drawn from a bag of 100 balls. The profits were enormous. By the late 1920s, The Cuban Connection. 1946, Havana, Cuba. Santo Trafficante Sr. dispatched his 24-year-old son to Cuba. The island was 90 miles off Florida's coast. Tourists flocked there for nightlife, gambling, beaches. The Batista government welcomed foreign investment, especially mob investment. Santo Jr.'s mission? Learn the casino business, make connections, establish the family's presence. For the next 8 years, Santo Jr. operated between Tampa and Havana. He helped run mob-owned casinos. He met Meyer Lansky, Lucky Luciano, and other major crime figures invested in Cuba. He formed a friendship with Fulgencio Batista, the military strongman who controlled Cuba through puppet presidents until he seized power directly in 1952. And he learned to speak fluent Spanish, rare for an American mafioso. August 11th, 1954. Santo Trafficante Sr. died of natural causes. Santo Jr. was 39 years old. He immediately took control of the Tampa family, and he expanded the Cuban operations dramatically. By 1955, Trafficante had moved to Cuba full-time. He maintained the luxurious residence in Havana's Vedado neighborhood. He held resident status essentially living as a Cuban. He openly operated the Sanssouci Cabaret and the Casino International. Behind the scenes, he had interests in the Hotel Havana Riviera, the Tropicana Club, the Sevilla Biltmore, the Capri Casino, the Comodoro, the Deauville, and the Havana Hilton. Second only to Meyer Lansky, Trafficante controlled more casino operations in Cuba than any other American mobster. The casinos generated millions annually. Tourists poured in from the United States, high rollers gambled at the tables, entertainment drew crowds. But the casinos were just the visible business. Trafficante also ran narcotics trafficking through Cuba. Cocaine from Colombia, heroin from South America and Asia. Using Cuba's military airports as transfer points, drugs flowed through Havana into the United States. He partnered with Tommy Lucchese's New York family on narcotics networks. He coordinated with the Tampa family's operations in Florida. He built an international drug empire. And he maintained his legitimate cover, the cigar factory owner from Tampa. The Revolution. December 31st, 1958. Batista's regime was collapsing. Fidel Castro's guerrilla army had been fighting since 1956. By late 1958, they controlled much of rural Cuba. Batista's military was losing ground. Corruption had destroyed public support for the government. Meyer Lansky saw the writing on the wall. On New Year's Eve, he contacted his casino partners. Close everything, take all the cash for safekeeping. Some listened. Others, including Trafficante, thought they could ride it out. January 1st, 1959, early morning. Batista fled Cuba on a plane to the Dominican Republic. Castro's rebels entered Havana. Citizens flooded the streets. Revolutionaries smashed casino slot machines and threw them into the gutters. The casinos were symbols of Batista's corrupt regime, foreign exploitation, inequality. At the Capri Hotel, rebels stormed the gaming room. Actor George Raft, who worked as a greeter, jumped onto the gaming tables and pleaded with them not to destroy anything. Trafficante watched from the Sanssouci. Castro hadn't even reached Havana yet. He was still marching from the mountains to the capital in a walkathon, giving interviews along the way. And in every interview, Castro said the same thing: the casinos will close. Trafficante hoped he was posturing. Surely Castro would realize the casinos generated revenue Cuba needed. February 19th, 1959. Castro's government issued a decree allowing some casinos to reopen. The Tropicana, Comodoro, Riviera, Havana Riviera, Capri, Hotel St. John's, and Hotel Nacional. The Deauville, Sevilla Biltmore, Plaza, and Sanssouci remained closed. Trafficante's properties stayed shuttered, possibly because of his close relationship with Batista's brother-in-law. Even the reopened casinos struggled. American tourists stopped coming. News of Castro's revolution had killed the flow of visitors to the island. Trafficante stayed anyway. He thought he could reason with Castro's government the same way he'd reasoned with corrupt cops and judges in Tampa. He was wrong about that too. The imprisonment. June 9th, 1959, evening. Trafficante relaxed in his Havana apartment. His mind was weighed down by the loss of casino revenue, the direction Cuba was heading. He'd heard a detention order was imminent. Harry Anslinger, head of the U.S. Bureau of Narcotics, had sent the Cuban government a list of major American narcotics figures residing in Cuba. Trafficante's name was on it. Trafficante sent the casino employee to visit Cesar Blanco, Cuba's director of public security. He tried to negotiate, to explain his position, to make a deal. It didn't work. Cuban authorities arrested Trafficante and imprisoned him at the Trascornia detention facility. Other American mobsters faced similar treatment. Castro's government had no interest in accommodating foreign criminals. Trafficante spent weeks in Trascornia. During his imprisonment, he received a notable visitor, Jack Ruby, the Dallas nightclub owner who would later kill Lee Harvey Oswald after President Kennedy's assassination. A British journalist working in Cuba claimed he saw Ruby visit Trafficante frequently, bringing food to the imprisoned mob boss. This detail would fuel conspiracy theories for decades. In July, the Cuban government announced Trafficante would be deported. They made reservations on a national airlines flight from Havana to Tampa on July 15th at 7:45 p.m. Tampa Sheriff Ed Blackburn prepared to receive Trafficante back on American soil. But at the last minute, the Cuban authorities suddenly held up the deportation order on orders from a higher authority. Eventually, Trafficante was released and deported to the United States. He relocated to Miami. His Cuban casino empire was gone. Millions of dollars in investments vanished overnight. The island he'd operated on for over a decade closed to him forever. Castro had nationalized all foreign-owned properties. The casinos, hotels, and nightclubs that generated the war's wealth were now Cuban government property. Trafficante adapted. He expanded gambling operations in Florida. He maintained his narcotics networks through Cuban exiles in Miami. He continued running the Tampa family from his Cigar City base. But Cuba, the golden goose, was gone. The CIA connection. September 1960, Washington, D.C. The CIA had a problem. Fidel Castro. The communist revolutionary had seized the Caribbean island 90 miles from Florida. He'd aligned with the Soviet Union. He threatened American interests throughout Latin America. The CIA wanted Castro dead. Director Alan Dulles passed the assignment to Deputy Director Richard Bissell. Bissell handed it to CIA Security Chief Colonel Sheffield Edwards. They needed professional killers, gangland-style hitmen. And the mob had motivation. Castro had destroyed their Cuban operations. Meyer Lansky allegedly offered $1 million reward for Castro's murder. Ex-FBI agent Robert Maheu, who later worked for Howard Hughes in Las Vegas, became the primary go-between. The CIA told Maheu to approach Johnny Rosselli, a mobster who worked for both the Tampa family and the Chicago outfit. Maheu offered $150,000 to have Castro killed. Rosselli declined payment but agreed to help. He introduced Maheu to two men, Sam Gold and Joe. Sam Gold was Sam Giancana, boss of the Chicago outfit. Joe was Santo Trafficante Jr. The CIA had recruited the mob boss who'd just been expelled from Cuba. Trafficante worked with the CIA and Cuban exile groups on multiple assassination plots against Castro, poison pills, exploding cigars, Mafia hit teams infiltrating Cuba. None succeeded. Trafficante later testified that he acted out of patriotism, receiving no payment. But some believe Trafficante continued cooperating with the CIA primarily to avoid prosecution for his criminal activities in the United States. By 1962, Trafficante and his mob partners had become convinced the Cuban Revolution couldn't be reversed by simply killing Castro, but they continued playing along with the CIA plot. It protected them from federal prosecution. The FBI finally sees it. For decades, Santo Trafficante Jr. maintained his cover as a legitimate businessman. He owned cigar factories in Tampa. He listed his occupation on government forms as cigar manufacturer or talent agent for International Amusements Corporation, a company that booked entertainment acts. When law enforcement questioned him, he gave short answers or took the Fifth Amendment. In 1954, Florida convicted him of bribery. The Florida Supreme Court overturned the conviction. In 1957, he was arrested at the Appalachian meeting, the infamous summit where law enforcement caught over 60 mob bosses gathered at a Utica, New York estate. Those charges were dropped. In 1981, at age 66, Trafficante faced his first serious federal charges, a RICO indictment for labor union kickbacks. 16 defendants, a 2-year federal probe into the Laborers International Union Trust Fund. The racketeering charge carried a mandatory 20 years in prison and $25,000 fine if convicted. U.S. Magistrate Sherbert Shapiro asked Trafficante what he did for a living. Trafficante replied, "Nothing," then added, "I take the Fifth Amendment." The case eventually fell apart. Trafficante avoided conviction. March 17, 1987, Trafficante died of natural causes in Houston, Texas, age 72. He'd run the Tampa family for 33 years, from 1954 to 1987. He'd controlled massive narcotics networks. He'd operated casinos in pre-Castro Cuba. He'd worked with the CIA on assassination plots. He'd been arrested multiple times. He never spent a single night in an American prison. The FBI eventually documented everything. Treasury Department reports detailed his narcotics trafficking. Bureau of Narcotics files tracked his drug channels through South America and Cuba. FBI reports documented his casino operations, his mob connections, his Cuban exile networks in Miami. But documentation isn't conviction. Trafficante understood how to insulate himself. He used frontmen. He avoided direct involvement in criminal acts. He maintained legitimate businesses that explained his wealth. He took the Fifth Amendment when questioned. And most importantly, he kept a low profile. While Sam Giancana dated celebrities and drew FBI surveillance everywhere, Trafficante stayed quiet. He lived modestly compared to flashier mobsters. He acted like a boring Tampa businessman. The FBI knew he was guilty. They documented his crimes. They built files spanning decades. They never made it stick.
Why he succeeded. Santo Trafficante Jr. ran one of America's most successful crime families for over 3 decades because he understood 3 principles. First, legitimacy is the best cover. The cigar factories weren't just fronts. They were real businesses, generating real income. That made it nearly impossible to prove his wealth came from crime. Second, low profile beats high profile. Trafficante avoided attention. He didn't seek media coverage. He didn't cultivate a public image. He was boring, and boring doesn't attract FBI resources. Third, patience beats impulsiveness. When Castro took Cuba, Trafficante didn't start a war. He adapted. He moved operations to Florida. He built new networks. He waited for opportunities. The Cuban casinos generated millions annually. Losing them should have destroyed the Tampa family. Instead, Trafficante survived. He rebuilt. He maintained power for another 28 years after Castro's revolution. Most mob bosses from his era went to prison or got murdered. Vito Genovese died in prison. Carla Gambino died before prosecution. Sam Giancana was murdered. Paul Castellano was murdered. John Gotti died in prison. Trafficante died a free man, at home, never having served federal time. For years, Santo Trafficante Jr. presented himself as a Tampa cigar manufacturer, a legitimate businessman, an immigrant success story. The FBI knew better. They documented his narcotics trafficking networks. They tracked his Cuban casino empire. They recorded his mob connections from New York to Chicago to Miami. But known and proven are different things. Trafficante cigar factories were real. His talent booking agency was legitimate. His business licenses were valid. His tax returns showed legal income from legal sources. The criminal operations, the drug trafficking, the casino skimming, the mob violence happened behind that legitimate facade. And Trafficante was careful enough to keep the two worlds separate. When Castro's revolution destroyed his Cuban operations in 1959, the FBI thought they'd finally corner Trafficante. Without the casinos, where would his wealth come from? But Trafficante adapted. He expanded in Florida. He maintained narcotics networks. He worked with Cuban exiles in Miami. He kept operating. And he kept his cigar factory cover intact. That's what made Santo Trafficante Jr. so effective. Not his violence, not his territory, not his connections. His patience, his discipline, his understanding that in America, looking legitimate is almost as good as being legitimate. The FBI realized he controlled Cuba. They documented his drug empire. They tracked his mob activities for 40 years. But the cigar manufacturer from Tampa died a free man anyway.